Um, so today we're going to be going over the J Mart Jewelry Outlets Incorporation versus Standard Design case. My name is Danielle.
I'm Tiffany.
My name is Akil.
Okay, so this court case specifically talks about piercing the corporate veil. So what exactly is piercing the corporate veil? It's basically a situation where courts put aside the limited liabilities and hold the corporation shareholders or their directors accountable for the corporation's actions or their debt. So what limited liability is that it implies that a corporation is responsible for its corporate actions and a shareholder's liability is limited only to their investment inside the corporation. And so this video talks a little bit more about what exactly happens when you pierce the corporate veil.
Piercing the corporate veil is something you never want to experience as a business owner. What it means is that you're no longer getting the protection, the limited liability protection that a corporation offers or a company, LLC, offers to you. What happens is somebody might sue your business. They start taking discovery, meaning they ask for a request or production of your documents, they take your deposition, and they discover that you have not been following the requirements of the corporation statutes in the state in which you're formed. Maybe you haven't been filing your annual reports, you haven't been keeping annual meeting minutes, you don't have a board of directors. Therefore, they're going to say you're not really operating as a corporation, you're violating the state statutes, so now I can come after your personal assets. So I've pierced the corporate veil of limited liability protection. You don't want that to happen, which is why you want to have good records and you want to make sure that you're following the minimum requirements of the state for your business entity.
So going over the facts of the case, just to introduce who the defendants and um, appealees were. So Standard Design was the supplier for the corporation of J Mart Jewelry Outlets and Inc. Mind you, this is just the name on the case, but there was also 3 other stores that I will be talking about later that were a part in the complaints against Jim Halter and his corporation. So Jim Halter was a major shareholder in J Mart Jewelry Outlets Incorporation. So he's the person that is being sued and accused. J Mart Jewelry Outlets Incorporation was about to go out of business by April of 1991, if not for sure June of that same year. With Halter knowing this information, there was evidence to prove he paid off his American Express card balance of $6,902.87 and even purchased a brand new Cadillac. Furthermore, making 3 payments on the car, then transferring the title over to his name for $1 with corporation funds. So he was, knowing that the business was going to go out of business, he used the corporation funds for his own personal gain. And that's what they were complaining about and what they accused him with.
Okay, so the plaintiff of this case is J Mart Jewelry Inc. Incorporation, but more specifically, it's about a man named Jim Halter, who is also the appellant of this case. So Jim Halter was a major shareholder for J Mart, and he knew that J Mart Jewelry Outlet was about to go out of business soon, and so knowing this, he used corporate funds for his own personal needs. And when the court did not rule in his favor, he tried to appeal, saying that there wasn't enough sufficient evidence for it. And the defendant of this case is, on the court name, it says Standard Design, but Standard Design is one of the 4 companies that tried to sue Halter. So there were a total of 4 creditors that kind of worked with the company. So the other 3 besides Standard Design were JGL Inc., Roma Industries Inc., and Entering Inc. And so they all filed complaints for alleged joint and several liabilities on open accounts, fraud, and racketeering as evidenced by theft and mail fraud.
So the procedural history starts when the four suppliers of Jim Halter and J Mart Jewelry Outlets Incorporation brought action against the defendant for racketeering, fraud, and liability for several open accounts that weren't supposed to be open. Jim Halter then went forward with asking for a directed verdict, which was denied by the state courts and was told his verdict would be determined by a jury. And Jim Halter then appealed this motion only to be told no by the Court of Appeals and was affirmed to be judged by a jury. Jim Halter also tried to say there was a lack of evidence to charge him with personal liability for piercing the corporate veil, which was later reviewed by an appellate court who reviewed the evidence and declared that the jury's verdict stands. And the jury had originally said that he was definitely guilty based on the evidence through, mail and the credit card statement balance that he was paying off his credit card with corporate funds. And it was also on record that he had bought a Cadillac with corporate also with corporate funds. So he was found guilty by the jury. And then when he tried to say there wasn't enough evidence to sue him, the appellate court still said that the jury's verdict stands. And then all four suppliers that I had mentioned earlier, and so did my teammate Tiffany, all four suppliers were awarded money. So Standard Design won $107,517. JGL ended up getting $184,104.29. Roma ended up getting $64,261.57. And Interrings ended up getting $136,819.93.
So the issue with Jim Halter and his appeals to the court was he was saying that there was a lack of evidence for the jury to make a decision based off of what the previous verdict was. But the problem was that there actually was plenty of evidence that helped the defendant's case. So like Danielle and Tiffany discussed earlier, he used the company funds to pay off his Cadillac, pay for part of his Cadillac, as well as paying off his personal Amex expenses. And that's a direct violation because you can't use your own company's funding to pay for personal expenses. The most you can do for company funds is using them for business expenses, but not for paying off your Amex balance.
So the judgment in holding, the court's final decision was to not allow Jim Halter's motion for a directed verdict. And also after reviewing evidence and appeals, said that the verdict brought against the defendant and corporations by a jury still stands, which was to charge both the corporation and Jim Halter with individual responsibility for the open accounts, along with fraud and racketeering.
Okay, so for the reason for the judgment that was held was there was plenty of evidence. Even though Halter claimed that there wasn't enough, there was plenty of evidence to prove that he was guilty. So Halter has known as early as April and no later than June of 1991 that Jmart would have to cease operations because of the financial difficulties it was going through. There was also plenty of evidence that he used $6,902.87. That much was paid off from his personal balance using corporate funds on December 23rd of 1991, which was about 8 days before the corporation stopped its business. There was also evidence that the company bought a Cadillac for Halter, and after 3 payments were made, it was transferred over to him for a price of $1. So all this evidence was enough to prove that Halter was abusing the corporate forms, and so the verdict was not in his favor, and he was found guilty of piercing the corporate veil.
So after this presentation, the important thing to remember is what the definition of piercing the corporate veil is. I know Tiffany discussed it earlier, but to reiterate, it's a situation in which courts put aside limited liability and hold corporations, shareholders, or directors personally liable for the corporate's actions or debts. So the laws about piercing the corporate veil depend on which state you live in. So depending on which state you live in, it'll vary from what test or what part of the case or situation caused the veil to be pierced by the corporation. And so for the first question we have is a true or false. So the decision to pierce a corporate veil was not justifiable by the court, by the jury. So the answer is false. It was justifiable because, as we discussed earlier, there was plenty of evidence to prove that Jim Halter used company funds and falsified bank statements and information to try to tell the government that his corporation was not going under. And then the second question is, when can shareholder liability extend to personal liability? So first option is whenever the shareholder is unhappy with the corporation. B, when the corporate veil is pierced. C, when a majority of the shareholders want to. And D, if the shareholders want to sell their shares. So the correct answer is B, when the corporate veil is pierced. That's when the shareholders become personally liable, like we discussed in the definition, for their shares and their investments in that company. All right, and thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.